Johnny Carson revealed the 9 guests who said no to racism in old Hollywood and meant it. These weren't performative statements made for publicity. These were career-risking stands taken when silence would have been safer and more profitable. They faced real consequences, roles worth millions that vanished, friendships that crumbled, FBI agents tracking their every move, and threats against their lives. But they stood firm anyway, using their fame as a shield for those who had none. During Hollywood's golden era, when discrimination was woven into the industry's fabric and segregation was the law in much of America, these white celebrities didn't just express sympathy, they took concrete action. They marched with Martin Luther King Jr., defied studio executives, walked off sets, and leveraged their star power to demand change. When Johnny Carson welcomed them to his show over 3 decades, their stories revealed what real courage looked like when everything was on the line. Let us know in the comments which story moved you most. Starting with number 9. Number 9. Tony Curtis. Tony Curtis was the Bronx-born son of Hungarian Jewish immigrants who became one of Hollywood's most recognizable heartthrobs. With his dark good looks and natural charm, he starred in classics like Some Like It Hot and Spartacus. But in 1958, Curtis made a decision that would define his legacy beyond any movie role. When Stanley Kramer cast him in The Defiant Ones as a white prisoner chained to a black prisoner played by Sidney Poitier, the studio had specific ideas about the billing. They wanted Curtis's name large and above the title, with Poitier's name smaller and below. Curtis said no. He insisted on equal billing for Poitier, telling executives that they were co-stars and should be treated as such. This was revolutionary. Black actors typically received secondary credit, no matter how substantial their roles. The film tackled racism head-on during the height of segregation, showing 2 men forced to overcome their prejudices to survive. Both actors received Oscar nominations, a groundbreaking moment. Curtis took enormous pride in the film's anti-racist message and became genuine friends with Poitier during filming. Studios labeled him difficult for his equality demands, and the choice cost him leverage in future contract negotiations. Tony Curtis died in 2010 at age 85. His act of generosity helped normalize equal treatment for black actors in Hollywood credits, proving that even small stands could create lasting change. Number 8. James Garner. James Garner, the Oklahoma-born star of Maverick and the Rockford Files, called himself a bleeding heart liberal without apology. On August 28, 1963, he participated in an act that shocked America and created one of the civil rights movement's most memorable images. Garner marched in Washington for jobs and freedom, standing among 250,000 people at the Lincoln Memorial. But what made headlines was the photograph captured that day, Garner walking hand-in-hand with black actress Diahann Carroll. At a time when a white man holding hands with a black woman could be seen as scandalous or even dangerous, Garner refused to care what anyone thought. He had helped organize the march alongside Harry Belafonte after Martin Luther King Jr. spoke at Burt Lancaster's home to inspire Hollywood's participation. The night before the march, the FBI called each celebrity individually, warning them to stay away and saying they couldn't guarantee their safety. Garner said no to their intimidation. He flew across the country because, as he later explained, he believed fellow Americans were being deprived of their constitutional rights. Southern theaters refused to book his films afterward, costing him significant income. As a member of the Screen Actors Guild board, Garner continued pushing for equality in Hollywood labor practices. James Garner died in 2014 at age 86. That photograph of him and Diahann Carroll remains an iconic image of Hollywood's commitment to civil rights when it actually mattered. Number 7. Kirk Douglas. Kirk Douglas lived to 103, long enough to see many of the changes he'd fought for actually happen. The Spartacus star and independent producer was Hollywood's rebel long before rebellion was fashionable, and in 1960 he made a decision that would end one of the industry's darkest chapters. Douglas publicly credited blacklisted writer Dalton Trumbo on Spartacus, becoming the first major star to defy the blacklist. This wasn't just about Trumbo. It was about standing against a system that destroyed careers for political beliefs. The film itself served as a civil rights allegory, with its story of slave rebellion resonating deeply during the freedom struggle. But Douglas didn't stop there. He used his producer power to demand something radical, integrated crews on all his productions. When a black crew member was denied access to facilities on one of his sets, Douglas said no. He walked off and refused to return until everyone received equal treatment. He insisted on integrated bathrooms and dining areas when segregation was still standard practice. Studios threatened to blacklist him just as they had the Hollywood 10. Douglas didn't blink. He marched with Martin Luther King Jr. in 1963 and provided financial backing to the NAACP and other civil rights organizations. His Jewish background had taught him what discrimination felt like, and he refused to stay silent when he saw others suffering it. The professional cost was enormous. He lost roles worth millions because studios considered him too controversial. Kirk Douglas died in 2020 at age 103. His sons Michael and Joel continued his activism legacy, proving that courage can be inherited. He showed that you could be both wildly successful and uncompromisingly principled, and his longevity meant he actually witnessed the changes he'd fought for take root. Number 6. Elizabeth Taylor. Elizabeth Taylor's violet eyes and legendary beauty made her one of Hollywood's most photographed women. But what many didn't know was that her fight against discrimination began when she was barely a teenager, and it never stopped. As a child star at MGM in the 1940s, Taylor witnessed segregation on the studio lot. When she saw her black co-stars being treated as lesser, she said no. At just 13 years old, she confronted studio executives, demanding that her black co-star receive the same treatment and respect she received. The executives tried to silence her. She refused to be silenced. As an adult star in the 1950s, Taylor continued saying no. She refused to attend segregated film premieres, even of her own movies. When one Southern premiere denied entry to black fans, she walked out, telling organizers that if everyone couldn't attend, she wouldn't either. In August 1963, Taylor marched in Washington for jobs and freedom, using her massive star power for civil rights fundraising. She canceled appearances at venues that practiced discrimination, losing money and opportunities, because her principles mattered more. Studios labeled her controversial and denied her specific roles, but Taylor had learned early that comfort came at too high a price. Her activism continued throughout her life. In the 1980s, when the AIDS crisis devastated the gay community and most celebrities stayed silent, Taylor said no to silence. She jumped into bed with her dying friend Rock Hudson, showing the world that AIDS patients deserved human touch and dignity. She received death threats for her AIDS activism, but never backed down. Elizabeth Taylor died in 2011 at age 79. She proved that female stars could be both glamorous icons and fierce advocates, and that activism wasn't just for men. It was for anyone who refused to accept injustice. Number 5. Humphrey Bogart. Humphrey Bogart was Casablanca's Rick Blaine, Hollywood's quintessential tough guy, with the iconic fedora and sardonic smile. But in September 1947, Bogart revealed what real toughness looked like when he co-founded the Committee for the First Amendment and led Hollywood's confrontation with government overreach. The House Un-American Activities Committee was investigating alleged communist influence in Hollywood, but everyone understood the real target: anyone who supported civil rights, equality, or challenged the status quo. Bogart said no to the intimidation. He and his wife Lauren Bacall joined Danny Kaye, Gene Kelly, and more than 20 other stars who chartered a plane to Washington, D.C. to protest the hearings in person. Bogart became the group's lead spokesperson. "I went because fellow Americans were being deprived of their constitutional rights," he told reporters, "and for that reason alone." They attended the hearings, sitting in the gallery smoking sardonically as Congress grilled their colleagues. They filed a petition declaring that Hawkwalk had violated the civil liberties of American citizens. They recorded "Hollywood Fights Back," a radio broadcast where Judy Garland's voice rang out, "We're American citizens. It's one thing if someone says we're not good actors. That hurts, but we can take that. It's something else again to say we're not good Americans. We resent that." The trip became a public relations disaster. Jack Warner, Bogart's own studio boss, was among the first witnesses to testify against their colleagues. The pressure became enormous. Studios threatened careers. The government investigated anyone who'd made the trip. Bogart eventually wrote an article titled, "I'm no communist," under tremendous pressure. But even in that article, he wrote, "I thought fellow Americans were being deprived of their rights, and for that reason alone." Years later, when Bogart appeared on Jack Parr's show Carson's predecessor, he defended his actions, explaining that standing up for others' rights wasn't about politics. It was about being American. Humphrey Bogart died in 1957 at age 57 from esophageal cancer. His stand against WAC showed that even Hollywood's biggest stars could challenge government overreach. He paved the way for the activism that would flourish in the 1960s proving that saying no to injustice was never the easy choice, but it was always the right one. Number 4. Gregory Peck. Gregory Peck's portrayal of Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird made him the face of moral courage for generations. But Peck didn't just play a man who stood against racism, he was that man. In 1962, when Universal Studios wanted to make To Kill a Mockingbird, they also wanted to soften its anti-racism message to avoid controversy. Gregory Peck said no. He fought to preserve Harper Lee's vision, refusing to let the studio water down the story's power. He took a percentage of profits instead of a guaranteed salary, risking his financial security to ensure the film got made authentically. His personal friendship with Harper Lee meant he'd promised to honor her work, and he kept that promise even when it might have cost him everything. But this wasn't Peck's first stand. In 1948, he'd starred in Gentleman's Agreement, one of Hollywood's first major films about anti-Semitism. His agent warned him that challenging bigotry could end his career. Peck took the role anyway, and earned an Oscar nomination for it. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, he refused to attend segregated premieres of his own films. When a hotel offered him accommodation but denied a room to his black cast member, Peck said no. He refused the suite and found lodging elsewhere. In August 1963, Peck marched in Washington for jobs and freedom. As president of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences from 1967 to 1970, he led a controversial diversity push, retiring older inactive members to make room for younger talent and people of color. Southern theaters boycotted To Kill a Mockingbird, and Peck lost roles worth millions because studios considered his stance controversial. He provided financial support to civil rights legal defense funds and testified in support of Soviet Jews' right to emigrate. When Johnny Carson asked him years later about risking so much, Peck simply said that some things mattered more than safety. Gregory Peck died in 2003 at age 87. Atticus Finch became America's moral compass because Peck lived those values off-screen, showing that true heroes don't just play them in movies, they embody them in life. Number 3. Burt Lancaster. Burt Lancaster had a crippling fear of flying. The athletic leading man who performed his own stunts, who seemed fearless on screen, would break into cold sweats at the thought of boarding a plane. But in August 1963, when he was filming The Train in France and heard about the March on Washington, Lancaster said no to his fear. He got leave from the shooting schedule and boarded a plane to Washington, D.C. His hands shook, his heart pounded, but he flew across the Atlantic, marched with Martin Luther King Jr. at the Lincoln Memorial, and then turned around and flew back to France the next day. The cause mattered more than his terror. Lancaster was one of the few white actors actually given the honor of speaking at the Lincoln Memorial that day, addressing the crowd about the moral imperative of equality. But the FBI had been watching Lancaster since 1947, when he signed a statement asking Congress to abolish the House Un-American Activities Committee. He was a member of the Committee for the First Amendment alongside Bogart. By 1963, the FBI kept extensive files on his activities, documenting his attendance at Beverly Hills integration meetings and noting his appearance in social commentary films. The CIA even forwarded a letter to the FBI from someone who noted with alarm Lancaster's political activities. When Nixon compiled his enemies list in 1973, Lancaster's name appeared alongside Paul Newman and other activists. During the Vietnam War, Lancaster helped defend Billy Dean Smith, a black soldier accused of fragging his officers. Lancaster contributed $3,000 to hire ballistics experts. Smith was acquitted. He and his wife Norma hosted a fundraiser for Martin Luther King Jr. at their home, and it was at that gathering that King spoke to Hollywood's elite, inspiring many to join the March on Washington. Lancaster served as chairman of the ACLU Foundation of Southern California. In 1988, when George H.W. Bush attacked Michael Dukakis for being a card-carrying ACLU member, Lancaster appeared in a television ad proudly holding up his own ACLU card. Burt Lancaster died in 1994 at age 80, after suffering a stroke. His willingness to overcome his greatest personal fear for the cause showed that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it, refusing to let anything stop you from doing what's right. Number 2. Paul Newman. Paul Newman's blue eyes and movie star looks made him one of Hollywood's most bankable actors. But those same blue eyes appeared on President Richard Nixon's enemies list in 1973, and Newman wore that designation as a badge of honor. Newman was among the first major white stars to march in the Deep South during the early 1960s. Birmingham, Selma, Washington. He showed up when it was most dangerous, when police dogs and fire hoses were turned on protesters, when simply being there could mean arrest or worse. In 1963, he marched in Birmingham and witnessed the brutal police violence firsthand. He kept returning to the South despite the threats because, as he later told Johnny Carson, staying silent wasn't an option when people were being denied their basic rights. In 1964, Newman testified before Congress in support of the Civil Rights Act. His testimony was powerful, personal, and persuasive. The FBI began keeping detailed surveillance files on his activities, documenting his attendance at civil rights meetings and tracking his movements. By 1973, Nixon's administration considered him enough of a threat that his name appeared on the infamous enemies list, alongside other activists who challenged segregation and discrimination. Newman received death threats at his home, targeting him and his family. Southern theaters boycotted his films, costing him hundreds of thousands of dollars in box office revenue, but Newman said no to intimidation. He refused to attend segregated premieres of his own movies. There's a story about Newman walking into a Southern theater for a screening, only to discover that black audience members were being denied entry. The theater manager offered to admit them if Newman would stay. Newman said no. He walked out, telling them that either everyone was welcome or he wasn't coming. "It's not complicated," he reportedly said. "Either everyone gets in or I don't." Newman demanded integrated crews on all his productions before it became standard practice. His 1967 film Cool Hand Luke served as an allegory about challenging unjust authority. His wife, Joanne Woodward, was equally committed to the cause, making them Hollywood's power couple for justice. Together, they created scholarship funds for minority students at multiple universities. Throughout the 1970s, when many celebrities moved on to other causes, Newman continued his civil rights work. Newman's Own, the food company he founded, always directed a percentage of profits to social justice causes. Paul Newman died in 2008 at age 83 from lung cancer. Newman's Own continues funding social justice work today, proving that sustained commitment matters more than single gestures. He showed that using privilege as a platform wasn't just right, it was necessary. When you have the world's attention, you have a responsibility to direct it toward justice. Number 1. Marlon Brando. March 27, 1973. The 45th Academy Awards. Marlon Brando had just won Best Actor for The Godfather, cementing his comeback as one of cinema's greatest artists. But Brando wasn't in the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion that night. Instead, a young woman in traditional Apache dress walked onto that stage, and what happened next became one of the most controversial moments in Oscar history. Sacheen Littlefeather was an Apache actress and Native American rights activist. Brando had sent her to refuse the Oscar on his behalf. As she spoke explaining Brando's protest against Hollywood's treatment of Native Americans and the ongoing Wounded Knee standoff, the audience divided. Some booed, some applauded. John Wayne backstage reportedly had to be physically restrained by 6 security guards from forcing her off the stage. America watched in shock. The media called Brando disrespectful, disingenuous, ungrateful, but for those who'd been paying attention, this wasn't sudden. Brando had been saying no to racism for decades. In the early 1960s, Brando contributed thousands of dollars to the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and created a scholarship fund for the children of Medgar Evers after the civil rights leader's assassination. He marched in Washington in 1963 with Martin Luther King Jr. He participated in the dangerous freedom rides through the segregated South. In 1964, he was arrested at a Native American fish-in in Puget Sound, Washington, protesting the government's violation of treaty-guaranteed fishing rights. But April 4, 1968 was the moment that revealed the depth of Brando's commitment. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. Brando's response was unprecedented. He was about to begin filming The Arrangement, a major film in which he was cast in the lead role. Production was set to start. Millions of dollars were at stake. Brando said no. He announced he was bowing out of the film to devote himself fully to the civil rights movement. If the vacuum formed by Dr. King's death isn't filled with concern and understanding and a measure of love, he said, then we all are really going to be lost. He gave money to the Black Panthers when doing so meant FBI surveillance and public condemnation. He counted Bobby Seale as a close friend. He attended the memorial service for George Jackson, the slain prison activist. Southern theater chains responded by boycotting Brando's films. Hollywood studios created what became known as the Brando blacklist, shutting him out of major roles because he was considered too controversial. too difficult, too willing to put principles before profit. Brando didn't just write checks. In August 1963, he appeared before the California State Assembly supporting fair housing legislation. He personally joined picket lines in demonstrations protesting housing discrimination. In 1964, he favored a boycott of his own films in South Africa, refusing to allow them to be shown to segregated audiences. In 1975, he participated in a protest rally against American investments in apartheid South Africa, demanding Nelson Mandela's release years before it became fashionable to do so. When Brando prepared for roles, he used his method acting technique to truly understand his characters. He applied that same dedication to activism. "I felt I'd better go find out what it is to be black in this country, what this rage is all about," he explained after King's death. He spent time in black communities, not as a celebrity tourist, but genuinely trying to understand their experience and their justified anger. The FBI kept extensive surveillance files on Brando's activities. His career was nearly destroyed multiple times. After his Oscar rejection in 1973, Hollywood tried to blacklist him again. That night, bullets were fired into his home while Sachin Littlefeather was visiting. Both were terrorized. The media attacked him relentlessly. He never backed down. Years later, when Johnny Carson asked him about risking everything, Brando said something that defined his entire approach. "Acting is not an important vocation in life when the world is still facing so many problems." His mother had taught him to stand up for marginalized people, and he never forgot that lesson. He considered activism more important than any role, any award, any acclaim. Marlon Brando died in 2004 at age 80 from respiratory failure. His Oscar rejection remains entertainment's most powerful protest, a moment that proved true artists use their platform for more than applause. Biographer Susan Mizrucci wrote that he modeled a kind of social activism, the idea that actors were obligated in some sense to use their fame to help others. Brando showed that when you have the world's attention, you have a responsibility to direct it toward justice, especially when it costs you everything. 9 very different stars, 9 approaches to the same fundamental truth. Silence in the face of injustice is complicity. They didn't all march, they didn't all make speeches, but they all used their privilege as a platform, their fame as a weapon against discrimination. Some were loud, some were quiet, but all of them risked what mattered most: their careers, their safety, their comfort, because they believed some things were bigger than stardom. They faced FBI surveillance, death threats, boycotts, and blacklisting, and they never backed down. Which story moved you most? Did any of these surprise you? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this look at Hollywood's real heroes resonated with you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about the people who changed entertainment history. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.